You know what? I just caught a small issue on the social feeds here, guys, on Facebook Live, YouTube. I think I just fixed a big audio issue. Rata, Pat, I think that you guys could hear me, all of us on YouTube. Should be much better right now. So I was asking everybody, and I'll re-ask now rather, on this VXRT trade, where do we see just basic support resistance looking at the pre-market? Audio should be good now on the social streams here. So I was asking just before, guys, looking at this pre-market chart for VXRT, where do we see basic support resistance on this? Kevin, keep in mind, we're looking at VXRT here. It's a $9 stock. I see answers like 365 and 450. We're looking at the 1 minute chart here, guys. One of our longtime members rejoining us here today for the first time, June. June C. Welcome on back, June. June's answering $9 and roughly 27 cents. I mean, you could see at least from the pre-market top, not 927 exactly, but I think I know what you're hinting at right here. Roughly around 915, 916-ish, right? Again, guys, we're dating back just to yesterday, the 13th, Monday. One of our members, Elim, says 1250 support. Guys, we're looking at VXRT here from the pre-market yesterday. I see 880 as a support level here. It topped off at resistance, and then it started dropping, right? So it seems like perhaps like an 880, that could be a potential support once the market opens. Now, I see from a few of us here on YouTube, I see from $9, a couple of us, Rata, and one of our members, Trading PC. Yeah, as a whole number, you would assume for a whole number to act as a key level. Now, I say that because you'll understand in a moment that typically you'll tend to see more volume, more total orders, and just with that larger total number of shares at these 50 cent and whole number price levels. So if I'm saying that about $9, probably going to say that about 850, right? Probably will say that at $8 as well. Now, the key word there is probably, so we need to confirm that assumption with what we see on level 3, with what we see on the TradeStation matrix here on the far right side, or in this instance, guys, I'll be bringing up as what we nickname level 4, otherwise bookmap here. So I'll be posting that up here in just a moment to show you exactly what happened going into the market open here. All right, so let's do that. I'm going to bring up a couple of snapshots here, guys, as I normally do during this Traders Talk workshop. So you could see that's exactly what happened. Now, looking at our level 4, so to say, these darker orange and red lines horizontally, those will represent price levels that have more volume at the time. So all of this dark red shading here where my cursor is, that's all volume on the offer at $9. So that was a great call from Rata and one of our members here, Trading PC. So with that, I'm still assuming that 9 will be a strong level upon the open. You can see there is volume on the ask roughly at that pre-market top, 915-ish. You could see that there was some volume on the bid, support at 850, right? Looking at the darker orange red shading here, the lines horizontally. All right, so I'm going to pull this back up in a second, guys. When the market opened up, for all of us here live in our trading room, we typically like to wait the first few minutes just to see true direction for all of these stocks that we're going to be calling out. Not even just this VXRT, but of course, with VXRT, we were also following another 6, 7, 8 stocks leading into the morning. So it's for that reason why we like to wait the first couple of minutes, first 3 to 5 minutes, so to say, before we try and take our trades. But really, we can't wait much longer than that, right? Our window of opportunity should begin to close as soon as the market opens. So I have to be fairly quick with making sure I get my trades in time. Otherwise, I'm going to miss the big run up. And then at that point, if we try and jump into a trade, as the volume is beginning to wane down, as we transition into the mid to late morning, we might end up kind of being on the tail end of that squeeze up from the market open. So we have to try and be quick with our entries. We still need to wait the first couple of minutes. So with that, let me ask all of our students here in our trading room this specific question. If you guys were attending the most recent set of classes, the phase 1 and 2 classes here that we host, When the market opens up for any stock, and of course this VXRT, what am I doing, me personally? I mean, I know I'm waiting the first couple of minutes, but is there anything in particular that I personally instruct you guys to do? When the market opens at 9:30, what do we need to look for? We have our levels of support resistance from the order book and from the chart. So that's all figured out already, right? So anybody here in our live trading room, when the market opens up, what do we typically look for, or what typically pops up right away after? Now, Grant, Chuck, Jim, Mario, Kevin, Amy, Greg, June, you guys are all saying it in one variation or another. Yeah, we need to look for volume, but it's not just, volume. Typically at 9:30, when the market opens up, we see this big market on close print, what we kind of nickname the opening bell print here for a stock. And that could come up, it usually comes up right at 9:30. It might take perhaps a minute for it to post. Let's just see what happened here from yesterday at the market open. All right. So for all of our students here, at least, what do you guys see? What's the big opening bell, big institutional print that you guys see? Greg calling out a 288,700 share print. I mean, it's the first print on the tape in this case, right? So it should be right there. But at $9, if there's any further reason to believe that 9 is a strong level, it's going to be because of that opening bell print. Now, let's take a quick look here from Kevin. He's saying, Josh, my screen is showing RIGL charts. That shouldn't be the case. For all of us in the trading room, at least on social media, you guys just chill out for a quick sec. I'm going to reshare my screen. Give me about like 10 seconds, Kevin. All of us in social media are still good here. Just going to reset my screen for the trading room. Should pop up in the next few seconds. All right. Should be good to go, Kevin. Let me know. So I'm going to move my screen from left to right here. Now, in hindsight, with the picture already painted, you guys see exactly what happened. It took a little amount of time, but the VXRT trade eventually ended up making a huge breakout over resistance. And we didn't need to wait for the 916 pre-market high here, did we? Notice what happened. Market opened up. This dropped. It held support at first from that 880 price. Now it's squeezed up. I'm still waiting the first, couple minutes, first few minutes here. So with this ending up making a pop and drop from 9 and then, of course, dropping off, I'm not exactly watching this as this is tanking. I'm not looking to short this stock. I don't think I can short this stock from TradeStation to begin with. So if I'm seeing this stock begin to break under support, and there are plenty of other stocks still, moving at the time, guys, I'm not going to waste my time watching this trade. Now, I say that very transparently because, you might get the question, well, why wouldn't you look to enter when it breaks over 880 right here or off the lows here even? So for anyone joining us on social media, keep in mind that we don't try and catch the falling knife. We don't try and buy off the bid, assuming that a support level is going to hold. We follow the momentum. We follow the smart money, so to say, right? So my best entries to buy a stock are specifically after they break through a very strong volume-based level on the way up. Now, if that's the case, then perhaps I could have entered here technically around that 880. That was support. It was holding pretty damn strong here. It broke under it, and then it ended up failing to move much lower. And when it popped through this level going up, technically, I could have had an entry there. Like I'd said, though, with everything else moving at the time, I was focused on a couple of other trades. Thankfully, though, whether it being just from the trading room, perhaps seeing a call out from one of our students, or perhaps seeing this pop up on one of our signals like Benzinga Pro, we ended up catching this trade in time to see this test resistance off of 9. So by the time this ends up reapproaching major resistance, what I'm personally doing is I'm setting up an order to enter should this make the pop. So I'm going to look to set up, in this case, like a limit order or stop limit order, such that if this breaks over 9, I will look to jump into the trade rather quickly and right over the level. All right. Now let's go into that here very quickly, because what I'll do here before anything is just go into the time and sales. And guys, we have so much to cover here. So normally these Traders Talk workshops are about an hour long. We'll see how far we go here. If it's an hour, a little bit more. You could see all of this green here at $9. That's pretty much at the time where we ended up seeing that order get filled. I might even have to go back a little bit more. Let me just double check. Oh, no wonder why. Yeah, I definitely have to. Oh, no. Not. It looks like 951. Okay, I might need to go back just a shade more here. Give me a split sec. At least with TradeStation, I have the ability to go back on the time and sales to go through exactly what happened by the time this ended up testing resistance. So what I'm looking for here at the time historically is to see the big seller at $9 get filled. I thought there was more volume aside from this. So at least it goes to show, though, once this ends up cracking through that resistance at $9, we're looking for a lot of green, of course, at this price. But more importantly, we need to see the foot on the gas pedal. We need to see this, show volume confirmation above 9. So by the time this pops and I'm in, we see exactly that. It's a very good sign to see continuation moving up higher. All right. Now, that's the first entry on this trade. And, I don't know if I'm going to have the chance to run through every single level from this run across the day here, guys. We were looking at $9 because that was a strong pre-market level. And that was the opening bell print. So that was, as I call it, our first major line of defense on the trade for across the morning. So I'm going to bring up my bookmap pictures right now on this trade. And you could see exactly the break off of 9. Looks like there was some seller here, but they ended up pulling their shares. There was still some volume, but I was thinking to see a little bit more than what we had. Needless to be said, though, it popped over 9, ended up popping over 910 as well, and from that point, liftoff. So let me ask you guys this quick question. I kind of answered it myself a bit earlier, but that was based on an assumption. Looking at this screenshot of as what we call level 4, looking at this picture of level 4, what's our next resistance on this trade? What's our next resistance on VXRT? Jose, Mauricio, Jim, Grant, you guys are all hitting it. $9.50. $9.50, guys. You can see, and this was here as soon as the market opened up. It was here from pre-market, even looking at that. But yeah, you see over 100,000+ shares on the offer, specifically at 950. It does say like 109,760. So, clearly goes to show that once this breaks above 9, I'm looking to see this make a push towards that 950. All right. So with that, it's not for me to assume this is going to touch 950 perfectly, but it's also for me to say if this breaks over 9 and pops, I'm not really looking for like a 5-cent profit on this trade. I'm not looking to make 5 or 10 cents on this trade. I'm inclined to believe that if this, ends up being our breakout level, I should probably get close to 50 cents. If I undercut the move and say 40, 45 cents from the level, I'll take that by all measures. Now, with that said, we end up seeing VXRT explode over 950, didn't it? This thing ended up just running right over the level. You can see it held under 950 for a little bit, guys, almost building this like Fausto flag formation. I'll go back to the TradeStation chart just to show that. But once it ended up breaking over 950, next major volume-based resistance ahead at 10. From there, 1050. Now, with that, though, of course, the seller at 1050 didn't pop up until, like 10:15 Eastern time. And, even after that, you ended up seeing a stack of these orders, these darker red lines that were on the ask. They popped up almost at the same time. So as this continues to move up after the market opens, while I'm led to believe that this has the chance of making a specific type of move, I'm not going to assume that. Meaning, as this breaks over 950, I'm not necessarily expecting this trade, this VXRT, to make the same type of clean pop over the next resistance here at 10. At least not the first time. So going back to the TradeStation charting here, to see this VXRT gap up in pre-market, to see it run down to like 850-ish, 855, and then fly all the way up this fast. At some point, this is going to begin to make a false breakout, right? So, if this ends up holding underneath 950 and popping over the level, I'll think the same with this. If this makes a pop and then slams back under the level, then very well likely that could be as what I would call a false pop, a false breakout. Of course, hindsight shows that didn't happen. It kept moving up. But look what happened the next resistance. This ended up making a push up to 10. And you guys saw this on Bookmap just before, but ended up becoming very shaky around the $10 major resistance ahead, right? Popped up, dropped down. It started cutting through the price just minute by minute. So when I typically see that, if I'm not already out of the trade by then, I'm going to be. And at that point, I'm not going to look to try and jump back in on this trade until I have that much more confirmation knowing that we're ready for the next move up. All right. So you could see as we head into the mid-morning here, 10:15, 10:30 Eastern time, the momentum of this trend begins to die off slightly. The volume really begins to wane down. But look what happened. It ended up reforming resistance underneath and at 10. So perhaps the next pop, the next chance this has at breaking above 10, we'll see this make a higher high. Now, that's easy for me to narrate to you guys here because that's, of course, exactly what happened. But for all of us here live in our trading room, and for all of you guys at least, you guys know this from class. We talk about this exact pattern every month in class, specifically in the phase 2. If we end up seeing a stock make a false breakout over a level, and if it holds underneath that resistance for a brief period of time after, unless if there's something huge as far as like a big iceberg order on the ask right above that price, unless if that's the case, I'm very likely to re-enter that trade over resistance if that happens. All right, so I'm going to pull Bookmap back up, level 4, and just show what happened here afterwards. It ended up doing just that. It broke over a big order on the ask, rebroke at 10. It broke through all of these other orders as well on the way up to 1050. And guess what? Rinse and repeat, guys. Same thing happened at 1050 as it did at 10. It popped, made a false breakout the first test, made a huge shake back down to support. It made a move back up, but it failed to break higher. It failed to break over 1050 here. It held it perfectly. So it continued to drop, right? So just for all of us here, anyone in our live trading room, and especially just on the social feeds, you guys that are just fairly inexperienced with what we do on a day-to-day basis, we're not trying to hold on to a trade like this across the morning. Now, again, hindsight's 2020. This thing ended up running right up, and then news came out mid-afternoon, which led to a huge second or third move up here going into the end of the day. But we could always re-enter this trade, guys, and that's exactly what I did, at least. Once this ended up making a push up towards that 1050 level, going into the early afternoon, or going into the early afternoon right here, this is a very opportune time to try and look for the next, entry. Because of what I had said earlier, this made a false pop, false breakout over 1050 once. And when I see that, it at least shows me that we have some buying interest at that price. At least there was buying interest at 1050 when this iceberg order broke. And hopefully there was a lot of buying interest over the level. My assumption is there was, because look what happened afterwards. But with this kind of being painted after the fact, this holding underneath 1050, if this isn't failing to break any lower here, I'm more inclined to look for my next entry if this could re-break above resistance here. All right. Let me see if I have this picture here just to show you guys. Or rather, let me ask you guys this. After 1050, what's the next resistance level ahead? What are we assuming to be the next resistance after 1050? Greg, Lee, Jose, all saying 11, right? Yeah, I would assume that to be the next level, right? I assume. Well, it ended up making a perfect level-to-level move, didn't it? Right? Here's 1050. It popped. It pulled back and made a little bit of a shake. So I'm sure this could have scared a few of us here off the pop here again. But ended up running over 1050 shortly afterwards. And in this instance, at first came pretty close to 11, 1089 the high. So that's where I was saying to you guys earlier, when this ends up breaking over 9 and moves up, I'm not necessarily trying to get out exactly at 950. I'll undercut the move and get out perhaps a few cents underneath that price if I get there. So in the case here, going into the early afternoon, as this is still running, you might be a little unsure of how far this stock can move up towards, right? So an entry over 1050, an exit under 11, it's just responsible trading if it gives you that move at least. All right. So, guys, to go into this very Spark Note style, ended up coming out with news going into the mid afternoon. I think it was news in relation to like a $90 million contract, I think. Here's the thing, we don't trade the news as much. It's interesting to know the news. I'm going to pull it up for all of us right here, at least on Benzinga Pro. Oh, I was right with that. It was a $90 million. They raised $90 million in gross proceeds through At the Market facility. That's the news snippet, the news headline that came out going into the afternoon on VXRT. So, for the reason simply that in the morning, I'm not necessarily expecting that news to just come out. I'm going to take the profit when I can. And if news like this does come out going into the afternoon, and if this ends up making a huge pop afterwards, we know where to enter. We know where the next resistance was on this trade, at least. It was right off 11. So the news came out at the time at like 1:30 in the afternoon, I think that was. 1:36 Eastern time was the exact time that Benzinga posted it. So pretty much right here. Well, look what happened. It still took about 3 or 4 minutes to get to that resistance. There was still plenty of time to try and jump to this trade, look to see where the next resistance was. In this case, you could just see it was from the chart right off 11. But once it breaks over that next high, that next major resistance, off and running she went. That was it. So VXRT ended up closing very strong, of course. Failed to break out going into the final few minutes of the day, but ended up doing very well given the afternoon pop. So, of course, going into this morning, we're going to still watch this trade, and even furthermore, it moved up in the after hours a bit. The pre-market, it gapped up a little bit. So, again, we're going to keep our eyes on this trade. Now, let's quickly recap what happened after the market opened up. We'll do the same preparation, the same steps that we did from yesterday on this trade. Going into the market open, guys, looking at my screen here, what do we see as support resistance? This time, we know to assume that 50-cent levels and whole numbers are going to act as key levels. So we assume price levels like 13, 12.50, 12, and on the way up, 13.50, 14, etc. If there's anything else that looks like a really strong level, though, guys, just let me know. I'm just drawing my 50-cent levels and whole numbers here. That's it. I'll tell you, 14 is a pretty strong top. Pre-market high, double top here. All right, I see a couple of answers here. I saw roughly around 1375, and that's really the one that I was going to say myself. It looks like more 1365 here, if anything. Just holding underneath 1365-ish, 1367-ish. Now, after this, we're going to go through that EQ stock from yesterday too, guys. I wanted to start with the VXRT because we ended up seeing continuation, this morning. So let's at least pull up Bookmap. I don't have the snapshots here. Instead, I'll just bring up the whole program. There we go. All right, so as far as support resistance based on the order book, based on level 3 and level 4, well, it looks like we have support building here at 13. Big support, 68,000 share order on the bid. Well, I assume 1350, and that will likely be a level after the market opens up. But looks like there's more here at 1361, right? 1360-ish, 1361. There's just more volume on the offer here. And the same to be said over here, just at $12.70. This was a pretty strong support, it seems like, right? Doug on YouTube asking that, yeah, that 1370 was more from the chart, I thought, but it was really 1360 that was holding from the order book, Doug. So I'm going to actually lower my line here. 1360. We'll see what that does. I got to put a line at 1270. 1270 is where we saw some volume on the bid, right? All right, so once more, let me just go through time and sales, guys. We'll go through the opening bell print, as I call it, once again, and then we'll see what happened after 9:30. All right, so for all of us now at this point, if you guys know what the opening bell print means at this point, what's the opening bell print on VXRT from this morning? Mauricio, Amy, Jose, Greg, all saying $13.19, right? Yeah, you can see this one's in black. It's a negotiated print in between the bid and the offer, but 548,000 share print. That's specific at, what was that again? 13.19? Yeah, $13.19. All right, so that's the last line I'll draw up here in the meantime, folks. Let's just see what happened, how this played out. Now you can see my chart's all aligned crazy here, right? Now I'm just doing this and just showing you all of the lines that I drew up just to show exactly how well these levels held after the market opened up. So once the market opened at 9:30, there was no real wait. There, if you waited the first 5 minutes, you were going to miss the extreme pop here at 9:30, which happens, right? So I didn't trade this at 9:30. Actually, even scarier enough than that. My platform ended up freezing up right at the market open this morning, so that was pretty scary. I was looking to try and jump into a few trades within the first 5 or so minutes, and I was trading Neo, VXRT, a couple of others, and I was all jammed up here. So even if I wanted to jump into this trade myself, I freaking missed it, but ended up just breaking out as soon as the market opened up. So, in this case, we're going to wait the first 5 or so minutes, right? The first, 3 or so, 5 or so minutes. So with that said, of course, this pops and we missed the first big part of the trade. Well, let's see at least where support resistance is once this ends up running up. All right. Give me a split second. So when the market opened up, we all saw the opening bell print at 13.19 right here, represented by this big green dot. And it took off instantly, right? So as this opens up and runs, it's breaking through resistance, and this joined the ask pretty much right as the market opened up. So this is something that we didn't necessarily see in pre-market. But $13.65 kind of split in between my 1360 and the 1370 that was on the chart. Ended up just running right over that, ran right over 14. All right, so on a trade like this, again, we still need to wait the first few minutes. But once we end up seeing a stock rip right through resistance that we have, I mean, 2 price levels in a row like this, 1365-ish or 1366, then from there, $14. At a bare minimum, I would anticipate 1365-ish to act as a major support level should this, pull back. If not 1365, I have to think that 14 is going to act as that point. So we end up seeing this run right over both orders that were on the ask. It topped off at 1450. It pulled back rather sharply. Now, again, on a trade like this is still just 9:32 in the morning. I advocate to all of our newly enrolled members joining us here that, listen, wait the first, 3 to 5 minutes. So more for our level 3, 4, and 5 traders inside our cyber group room. I'll explain what to do in a situation like this as this is pulling back. But afterwards, this ends up making the next leg up. And in this case, we end up seeing the next major resistance level at 15 get tested. So it looks like it filled the iceberg order at 15. Pulled back, but the next attempt, the next shot, the second attempt break of this level, that's where I would anticipate a higher high at a minimum. So that's where I say for any of our new members joining us here, I would want you guys to follow the instruction that we give in class. We still would want you to wait the first, 2, 3, 5 minutes of the market open. In this case, look what happens. We ended up seeing this test 15. It broke through the order at 15. No one else really joined the ask of that size after. And once it ran over 15 for the second attempt, obviously a higher high. So in this case, we had the 14 support hold. And like I'd said, 15 was our next, major level of resistance ahead. Oops. Yeah, tested 15 on the nose, so it didn't make the false breakout at first, but it ended up filling a huge 700,000 share order on the ask. And once it ended up breaking over the level, off and running she went, right? Up towards 16, 1650-ish. Now, unfortunately, given the move that we had yesterday, the pre-market run, the run after the open, of course, and this morning, we can't keep expecting this stock just to run up perfectly, right? That's what I had said yesterday after the first leg. But here, after this breaks over 15, obviously this thing makes an explosive move up, breaks over 1550, breaks over 16, tops off essentially underneath 1650, about 3 levels up. Well, you can see it held support at 15 the first shot, but we can't keep expecting this stock to continue to hold. If we have lower highs, if this is failing to run up again and break higher and higher, I wouldn't expect this to continuously hold support at 15, especially with how much this thing has moved over the last 2.5 days. So ended up beginning to shake, rattle, and roll under 15. It held 15 as resistance after, like a rock. And then at this point right now, it doesn't seem to be actually, I was going to say over here is beginning to pull back, but this thing is pretty strong right now going into the early afternoon. All right, we'll see maybe later on, perhaps once we're finished with our Traders Talk workshop, if this VXRT could potentially run over 15 again. It doesn't share order on the ask that I see from level 4. Let's see if this maybe gets closer to 15. You might end up seeing the order pop up here. I don't want to waste too much time watching this if it's not going to make that pop up towards 15 again. At least from Bookmap's perspective, you can see some volume on the offer currently at 15 bucks. 62,000 share seller. All right. So, I mean, hey, this is kind of holding over the VWAP here in the meantime. Should this re-break resistance at 15, it wouldn't shock me to see this make, roughly 35, 40 cent move up, perhaps towards that 1550, perhaps even more, right? 16 the next level after that, probably 1650 after that point, so forth. So pretty much every 50 cents, you're looking at a major volume-based level. All right. So, guys, if you have any questions altogether, this goes for the trading room. This goes for any of our attendees on Facebook Live and YouTube. If you guys have any questions on this VXRT trade, just type the letter Y in the chat board right now, and then I'll make sure I go back to your questions. I want to go right to the next trade, though, here, and that's on this EQ. All right, so going into this morning, this is not much of a surprise entirely. What makes the percent gainers list one day typically makes the percent losers list the next. But let's go into, of course, what we had from yesterday morning. We had this on our pre-market watch list, this EQ. It was on the CTU morning watch list, of course, for a stock that's up, 50, 100 plus percent when the market opens up. We're going to expect a pullback. We're going to expect a drop off, a pullback. So, got to say, the drop off here is not surprising, but man, this thing was trading a wacky spread. It was making these moves up to resistance here at 10, but topped off and dropped. So, if anything, when the market opened up, this wasn't my first stock that I was personally watching. I guess I could have had some action from 8 to 10, but once this ended up pulling back, I wouldn't have expected this to make the move that it ended up making. All right. Give me a split second here. Should have the EQ trade showing for you guys right now. Yeah, I think I'm good. All right. So with EQ, it took a long while to get the gears going on this trade, of course, right? So I'm going to show you what happened on Bookmap, where the support, where more so the resistance was on this trade, and how we were able to follow this much after it ended up breaking that higher high. So, of course, like I'd said, this was on our CTU pre-market list, the morning watch list, but we took our eyes off it for quite a period of time. kind of similar to that VXRT trade, given how much this stock was moving even from pre-market trading. I'd be more inclined to focus on 50-cent and whole number price levels as major increments. So $10, $11, $9 below, etc. So I'm just going to line up a couple of these. Now, same to be said with EQ as we did before in VXRT, at least from yesterday when the market opened up, I still need to go through what's called the opening bell print, see if that's going to act as a key level for us after the market does open. So looking at this EQ trade, you could see the opening bell print, in this case right at 9:30 on the nose, at 9:02, an 85,000 share print on the tape. Now, to the inexperienced eye, that doesn't really seem like a big deal. Having your opening bell print like that at 9:02, or even if it's just a gigantic iceberg order on the ask, I'm not going to buy this stock when it breaks over 9. I'm going to look to buy this stock when it breaks over 9:02. Look what happened. This essentially topped off right at the opening bell print. It cracked it by a damn penny, came right back down, and the thing tanked after, right? So that's a very serious point. We need to make sure we're going to buy through a very big volume based level. All right, well, market opened up, this tanked. It held resistance pretty nicely here. It popped above resistance, but like I'd said, made a false breakout essentially, a pop and then dropped after. Most importantly, look what happened. It ended up holding underneath 902 and $9 in this case. All right, so ended up continuing to drop off. We ended up seeing other levels here on the chart show. Of course, I would assume the same to be said at a price like 850, the same to be said for a price like 8, 750, etc. There we go. Just going to draw that yellow to make that the opening bell print so you guys realize. So it took a long while to get this thing moving. Looks like once this ended up breaking over both 850, but more importantly in my case, although I didn't take this trade, I would have entered over 9 here. I'll tell you, I probably wouldn't have taken this from 850. It held it perfectly and ran up. That's just me being honest with you and saying I'm probably going to wait for this to crack over 902 if I was following this at the time. Now, we ended up catching this much later than that as well. So I think it was one of our students, Jerry, that pointed this out. It was, moving up pretty nicely at the time, going into the mid-afternoon, roughly prior to 1 o'clock. So let's skip ahead. Now, at this point, we know 9, 950, 10. But let's just look at Bookmap. Let's look at level 3, level 4, so to say. And let's say if we ended up catching this trade a little late, we're a little late to the party here. In hindsight, you and I both know what happened to this move afterwards. By the time this hit 3, 4 o'clock, this was, flying up towards $30. But with that here, we don't know that right here in the moment. So what's our next level of resistance here on this trade? What's our next level of resistance on this trade here? I have a question from one of our members on YouTube, and they had asked this just a few minutes ago. So one of our members, Rata, is asking, how do you even find that stock? Why did you select it? So typically, just keep in mind that we scan our percent gainers lists, our percent losers lists. That should come with any platform, but we scan that very early in the morning. When news comes out, we'll see stocks make these crazy pops right off the bat or drops. And with that, they'll already be on the percent gainers and losers list from your platform. So we ended up scanning this right from our broker, from our platform TradeStation here, and all of our students live in our room ended up doing the same on other platforms. All right, so George, Jose, Phil, all saying 11. Rata and Pat both saying 11 in the YouTube stream. Absolutely. I mean, 22,986 share seller. Ended up making a run up to resistance. Now, on a trade like this, I'm going to pull back Bookmap for a moment because this EQ trade, guys, the part that I wanted to get to here was that later on in the afternoon, This ended up breaking all-time highs. The all-time high on this EQ trade was back in like November of 18. I think this is like my first time ever trading the stock personally. This might even be the first time that we ever called the stock out in the Cybergroup room. So this is just one that we're inexperienced with. I ended up looking on the daily chart just to see, hey, where's the all-time high on a trade like this? It's running up pretty nicely. It's not until 1969. I say that because, well, if and when this cracks over 1969, there's no historical resistance to work with. There's no, past data from years back that we could work with. There's no significant price that's been holding. So if and when this breaks above the all-time high, we only should be focusing in on, the order book and level 3 as far as where our next resistance is from there. All right. Now, with this trade, when this ends up breaking over resistance here at 11 bucks, normally I would be more keen to look for a false breakout. Normally, I would be. Just like I said before in VXRT, we're heading into 12:30, 1 o'clock Eastern time. So we normally don't see trends like this going into lunchtime here. And for a move like this already, I would still expect a false breakout. Let me show you what happened here. This thing ended up making the run right over 11. It was building underneath it really nicely, but I don't think an order was getting filled at 11 bucks. So there was no like big buying interest at 11 until it broke. Look at the highs of these bars: 1098, 1097, 1097 right here. You know what that tells me? Unlike VXRT in the run that we were just reviewing, there is no buying interest here. There is no one buying directly from the ask. There's no one selling from the ask at 11 as well. But it's to be said that there's no buying interest at that price. Well, notice what happened here really quick, guys, because you do see a bit of a spike in volume right here, right before it broke out. All right. So what happened? Why did that make such a nice squeeze up, and why did it just perfectly run from that point? Let me ask all of our students here in our trading room this quick question. I just asked this as the base. What creates these levels of support resistance? It's a very basic question that we ask in our phase 1 course. What creates these levels of support resistance? Not looking for a fancy answer here, guys. And very quickly enough, all of our students are saying buyers and sellers, right? Absolutely. I mean, volume, supply and demand, buying and selling, all phrases synonymous with one another. All right. So now let me ask you. Now we'll get a slight bit more specific. Where do we find these buyers and sellers? We've been reviewing it the whole time here, right? But there's a reason why I'm going with this route. Where do we identify these buyers and sellers? Brian says the ECN book, level 3, and level 4 otherwise. Or, as Phil wrote in the chat board, time and sales. Those are the two answers specifically I was looking for. So with level 3, the trade station matrix on the far right side, when those orders get filled, they're going to pop up on the tape. But let me just tell you guys this. The orders that are on level 3 are not just every order that's looking to be bought or sold. I mean, those are the orders that are limit orders. Those are the orders that are posted on the book. But if I want to jump into this trade right now, I don't necessarily need to place my order on the bid to buy, or I don't necessarily need to use a limit order to get into the trade. I could just press buy at market. And with that, my order is going to get filled instantly directly off the lowest sell price. I bring that up because that market fill does not show on level 3. It only shows on the time and sales. All right. So what the hell is this then? Because shortly prior to this running over 11, and it was holding underneath 11 really well, a couple of things popped up, or maybe even disappeared. First, it looks like we had a huge support at $10.60. I mean, we're looking at as many as 169,000 share order on the bid. This is a massive order on the bid, which would act, hopefully, as a major support. Well, They ended up pulling their order. Went from dark red to this like empty shade of bluish black. When you see that, the order gets pulled. Well, look what happened shortly after. This thing just tanked, dropped all the way down towards a low here, roughly 1040ish, 1035. So I wouldn't expect this to necessarily make the move right then and there, right? But we end up seeing a big squeeze very shortly after. But with that came some huge transactions on the time and sales. I mean, looks like somebody just ended up unloading shares right at $10.74. This all took place within like a 5-second time frame. So that's where I say we need to keep our eyes on time and sales just as frequent as level 3. And if you miss those big transactions on the time and sales as it's moving, at least you can go back and say, well, this is a pretty big spike of volume right here at 12:48 Eastern time. So, that's where I could try and go back on the tape just to see what happened at that very given point. Right over here, you could begin to see all of this fill at 1074. This was just seconds right before it popped. You don't see that on the chart, do you? This all took place within this like 1 or 2 minute instance right here. I mean, really, this ended up dropping, but it ended up squeezing up, and we ended up seeing a ton of fills, specifically at 1074. Once we end up seeing this make a huge pop shortly to 11 at that point, that's where I would assume, in this case, for this to make the run. Remember, we didn't see this test 11 here, and going into the afternoon, normally I would say let's be very mindful, very careful of false breakouts, especially after a stock made such a nice run up from low to high here. But there's a reason why this ended up running so well right off 11. This was an absolute stressless trade, right? There was no point on this trade after it popped 11 where it broke under 11. Right? So that's the reason why we ended up seeing that. We ended up seeing just a bunch of volume get filled at 1074 with this picture painted already. Clearly, it goes to show that somebody loaded up right at 1074 right before the thing took off through 11. All right. I got a question from YouTube here from Doug. He's saying or asking, so if one of those larger sellers pulls their order, well, let me just say really quickly, that was not a sell order that was pulled, Doug. That was an order on the bid. We're looking at 1060 right here, right? This guy ended up pulling their order. That's an order on the bid. So that's a level of support. That's a buy order, so to say. So if we see that happen, more likely than not, I'm anticipating this stock to, begin to shake. Unless if instantly after this order gets pulled, and I really mean instantly, this pops right away after, I'm expecting this to begin to, fall back. All right, so this trade ended up just going crazy, right? Afterwards, ended up making a run up to 12, up towards 13-ish. And it looks like really it wasn't even 13. I'm going to say it's like 12.50. Next 50-cent increment here. Of course, I'll show a book map in just a moment. But it looks like this thing had a hell of a tough time trying to pop over $12.50. So here's our false pop, false break, popped over the level, dropped right back underneath it. I would expect this thing to drop a little bit lower at this point, given its extended run. But over here later on, this is where you would anticipate a potential continuation, where this is holding pretty nicely underneath 1250, and we end up seeing, of course, the pop, a higher high. Unfortunately, though, this ends up coming right back down. So before we continue this trade and seeing what happens as this just continues to fly up, I want to dive into this false breakout. Not this one. I'm talking about this right here. I didn't receive an email going over this exact sequence just after 1 o'clock, but my belief is that we had a couple of traders that ended up getting caught in that shake. So with this trade, the EQ, seeing it hold under, seeing it make the pop and drop from 1250 once, seeing it hold really nicely under 1250 the second time, and then when it ends up breaking over the level, guys, I'm going to look to try and jump in that trade. what would be our next resistance above 1250? Or where would we assume for our next resistance to be after 1250? Greg says 13. Absolutely, and that's what Bookmap showed. 1250, 13. Now, like I'd said before, when we end up seeing a stock test resistance once and it fails, in a short period of time after, if this ends up holding under 1250 and then re-breaks over 1250 here, should I enter? I'm expecting a higher high. Now, we did get that, don't get me wrong, but obviously this thing not only didn't touch 13 at the time, but it came back down really fast, didn't it? So this is where I say a couple of things. A, you can never go broke taking a profit, but it's not even that, because if you're expecting this to run up to 13 or maybe closer to 13 and just selling around 1290-ish, you're going to get caught up in the shake still, because you're not getting greedy necessarily, but based on what the next level is ahead, you're probably thinking you can get a little bit more out of this trade from 1250 than we got. The second thing that I'll say right here, though, is more important. This is exactly why we need to make sure, if it's not breaking higher, there's only one other way the stock is going to go, guys. We got to make sure we set a stop right under this 1250 level. I'm not necessarily trying to hold this from 1250 down to 12. And of course, we know what happened after. It ultimately ran over 1250 later on, but before it did that, it continued to drop, right? So ultimately, I'm not going to try and risk $1 plus per share, especially if I'm trading this on 1,000 shares a position. I mean, in hindsight, we know what happened afterwards, but in the moment, this very well could have been the end of the run. To see this go from, God knows where it opened up, like 8-ish or so, all the way up towards 12, and then to pull back, guys, that's a hell of a move already. So I would have been very content with that. But that's where I just say, for any reason going into the afternoon like this, we need to make sure we have our stop set. So once this breaks under 1250, we got to get the hell out. If there's another opportunity, that's where I'll look to try and jump in. If there's another opportunity. Obviously, hindsight stated that there was, because this started to squeeze back up. We saw more volume join the ask at 1250 here, guys. So the next time this breaks over resistance, if you get filled at least, it's an extremely easy trade. And I normally don't say the E word. I call it the E word like it's a curse word in our trading room, guys, because, not every trade's easy. If anything, with how fast a lot of these stocks are moving, it can be fairly difficult, especially as a brand new member joining us here. But if you're sticking in our Traders Talk workshops live and in the Cyber Group room week after week, you're following the same patterns that we go through stock after stock, should you set up a stop limit order right over 1250? And if you get filled, this was an easy trade, an easy profit. I say if you get filled, because based on how sharp it popped, if you ended up setting your stop limit order to the point where there's no gap between the stop price and limit price, very easily I could see your order getting skipped over as it runs up without you. All right, so this thing just flew, right? Ended up running right up towards even like $15, $16. So I'm just going to show a book map and show you pretty much what happened afterwards. When a stock like this breaks new highs and continues to run up, I'm expecting for there to be new levels of support resistance to pop up on the order book. I wouldn't expect for there to be, as clear, long-standing of a level as there was perhaps from this morning. You could see yesterday the 1250 level ended up popping up a bit later on. Let me zoom out here really quick. You could see 9 was our main level on this trade at first. It was popping in and out. But after that, we saw new levels pop up on Bookmap here. On level 3 on Bookmap, $9, more volume joined the ask. 950, more volume joined the ask. As it continues to go up, you'll see new orders pop up, right? So when this breaks over 1250 and all of this volume over here and flies, I'm expecting to anticipate false breakouts at some point on this trade, perhaps even from 14. It begins to pop 14. It's shaking. It's rattling around a bit. And then once this ends up making a higher high, at least it holds support off 14 and continues to squeeze. But the more this runs, the spread's only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. The order book, looking at the actual TradeStation matrix here, not just book map, but the TradeStation matrix, the NASDAQ book viewer, your ECN feeds, they're going to thin out a lot more as this continues to run up. So this stock will only become more and more volatile. It will look to move in larger increments minute by minute. So as this continues to move, we have to just make sure that we find the largest volume-based levels to put our focus on. When a big volume-based level gets filled, we should expect to see a big result. But the word big is defined in relation to what we've seen from the trade from the morning and what's currently ahead on the trade going into the rest of the day. So when this pops over 1250 and flies, there's no real long-standing resistance on this trade until 20. $20 is the next long-standing resistance level. Now, it's not for me to assume when this breaks over 1250 and 14 later on for this to fly. Like I'd said, we're going to find new levels of support resistance as this continues to consolidate and perhaps make some shakes and pop and fly. So it does go to show that roughly at 16, we see that same type of darker orange shade here as we had from 1250, as we pretty much had from 14, right? We didn't really see that from 1550 as much. Probably didn't really see that much around 15, though. It was kind of shaking around the level quite a bit. We end up seeing a lot of volume on the ask at 16 bucks. So if that's our next major level of resistance ahead, it's no surprise that this ended up holding resistance pretty nicely here, filled some volume on the ask, and the next time this begins to make the push over 16, I would look to jump in. Now, with that, though, of course, more volume pops up, 1650. So, I probably would have been scared to, see this run higher. I probably would have went in. And after this holding support off 16, if this isn't going to break out higher, I'd probably take a profit just right in between. And that's not that great of a trade anyway. Expecting to see this pop very sharply from 16, but have this hold underneath 1650 immediately afterwards, that would spook me. That would take me out with a partial profit. Of course, better to take a profit than walk away with this type of sharp drop off at least. But the next time this ended up making a very strong breakout, we ended up seeing this break over resistance. It held support off 15, but ended up breaking over resistance that we had, not even a 1650, but we ended up seeing more volume join the ask at 1590-ish, roughly 16 here, of course. So ultimately, once this re-breaks resistance, as I was doing the afternoon meeting, that's the next move to take. If not from 16, then of course from 1650 when it breaks the high of the day. All right. Now, with that, though, really quickly, because I'm going to finish up this move, and after that, we're going to finish up Traders Talk here. This ended up, of course, making the push up to the all-time high, 1969. Ended up making a move right up to the next long-standing resistance that I had called out at 20 bucks. Right? And once this ended up breaking over both, well, there's a new all-time high. When there's a new all-time high on a stock, given the right momentum, we're led to believe this could lead to an even sharper move up with there being no historical resistance or price levels to focus on. I mean, we ended up seeing the same thing happen, of course. It was on WIMI, W-I-M-I, back from Friday of last week and continuing going into yesterday morning. But eventually, this thing came back down really hard, didn't it? So I would assume the same to be said for that EQ trade. The EQ trade ended up breaking over 20, of course, with that new all-time high. I'll show bookmap one more time, at least before we finish up, because once it breaks over 20, we'll at least take a look to see what the next big volume-based level was on the order book, and we'll see what happens. Of course, you can see on the 1 minute chart, after this popped over 20, I think this was actually just the first halt across the whole day on this trade. Second halt came right around 26 bucks going into the final few or so minutes. This ended up reopening up even in the after hours. So this was halted at 3:51 Eastern time, and on a 10-minute volatility halt like this, well, with that, it's not going to reopen up until the post market at 4:01 Eastern time. This reopened up. It was shaking around and flew up a little bit more, but ended up just tanking shortly after. With this trade, once it cracked over 20 and that big resistance that was on the offer, let me ask you guys, what's our next level of resistance after 20? Is there anything that you guys see? I'll tell you, there's no dark orange line, that's for sure, after 20. If I zoom in, maybe. And Chuck says the moon. That's the hope. William says to infinity. All right, well, we got a few of us saying at 24 bucks. Notice the price increments, guys. I mean, just to zoom out of this picture, I had to drag this down. So you're looking at 50-cent increments on this, chart here. So roughly around 24 bucks, maybe underneath 24 a bit, right at 24, maybe a little over. We have roughly 13,328 shares. So given that being the next, resistance, at least on the order book, if this pops 20, I'm expecting this to make a move at least towards that 24, maybe 23.50 at this point, just a little bit under that price. Of course, this ends up running up much higher, blows my expectations out the water, goes right up to 24. But notice what happened, though, when it came off the halt. You guys called that out. David, Jose, Greg, I see a bunch of us on YouTube as well. Yeah, look what happened. The thing went right up to 24 when it reopened up from its halt. Got smacked down almost, three points before it continued moving up. Goes to show exactly why we focus on the order book, guys. It's the big volume-based orders that are on level 3 that likely create major support resistance. But it's not even just that. It's a matter of seeing the orders that get filled. So from earlier, that's where we were saying before, just 902, the opening bell print. That makes the world's difference to me, guys. That's make or break between a dollar plus profit on the trade versus like a 40-50 cent loss, because we failed to recognize that the opening bell print yesterday morning wasn't at 9, it was at 902. It's that exact cent level that makes the world's difference between walking away a big winner or walking away a big loser. Of course, aside from that, though, it's not just that. Of course, in our live classes, in our curriculum, for all of our students here in the trading room, keep in mind we'll be continuing with the Phase 1 stock course coming up next week. But we'll be talking more about risk management in those classes. So it's not just a matter of, following level 3 and time and sales and the chart to enter a trade. It's a matter of making sure that we're setting our stops, making sure that we have our line in the sand set, making sure we're realizing if this thing is if this thing is failing to break higher, there's only one other way the stock is likely to go. So we have to make sure we do as good of a job as possible at getting out before the thing turns around the other way. All right, guys. So we'll be talking about that in particular plenty going into the next 2 weeks ahead, like I'd said on in the Phase 1 and 2 classes. All right, Greg says, got to go to an appointment. Thanks, Josh. No problem, Greg. And with that said, we are going to finish up Traders Talk right now. So most importantly, because keep in mind that we tend to do these Traders Talks every week live in the Cyber Group Trading Room. So for anyone joining us for the first time live on Facebook Live and YouTube, if you guys have any questions just regarding any of the trades that we've covered, you could email me personally. Josh at c2trading.com. My name is Josh Levitan. I've been the senior instructor with CTU for the last 6 years. If you guys have any questions that you would like to ask me personally regarding these trades, send it over right to my email address, guys, josh at c2trading.com. Aside from that, if you guys would like to learn more about this trading room and what we offer here at Cyber Trading University, make sure that you guys subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure that you also press the notification button. I think that's the only way that you guys will know if we're going to join a live stream like this coming up. All right, guys, so make sure that you guys like, share, subscribe, and then push the notification button below. Aside from that, though, for all of our students here in the trading room, you guys know the deal at this point. We're going to continue to rescan the market going into this afternoon. So right after we finish this up, I'll take a quick break, but we'll rescan going into the afternoon, see what else we have. Aside from that, for all of our students here, if you guys have any other trades that you would want me to review with you guys one-on-one, or if you have trades going into next week's Traders Talk, feel more than free to send over a quick email, guys. One last time, Josh at c2trading.com. All right, guys, I look forward to seeing everyone back here for next week. Take care.